Hi, everyone. Looks like we're on time, right at 5 o'clock. So I am going to have an ask to amend the agenda. Okay. To amend the agenda to add, Karen asked if we could create a mission for the thing. We can either push that to another week so that I can draft something and we can agree to it, but I think we should at least have that discussion. So if we could add that to the end of our agenda and then approve the agenda as amended.
Sorry, I missed, what was the amendment?
Yeah, and that's also because I'm being vague because I'm still navigating to the agenda. It's always when I click on the Zoom that it does that. So if we could add an 5.5, 5B, whatever we want to call that, on the CDNR committee mission. That would be the amendment.
I would move that.
Great. Moved by Councillor Carpenter.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor McGee. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. That passes unanimously. We have an agenda. On our agenda, we have the minutes for this meeting. Did folks have a chance to look at the minutes? Great. Would somebody like to move to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councillor McGee, seconded by Councillor Carpenter. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Was that a discussion or was that you saying aye?
That was me saying aye. Sorry, I got excited.
No, no worries. I'm glad somebody's excited. Then we've got public forum. For those who haven't joined a CDNR meeting, we do take public forum at the beginning. We're also willing to take public forum as part of the discussion. Fortunately, the committees allow us to be a little bit less formal than we are for city council proper. So if anybody has anything they would like to say, feel free to raise your hand now, or if you'd like to wait for any presentation or information on each one of the topics, that is also a possibility. And we'll take your comments there. Not seeing any hands raised, I'm going to keep going and take us to our first agenda item, which I apologize. I have not been doing a good job of doing things, but I think we don't have the summary posted on our on the website. So I don't know if somebody would like to present on this, but I might work. I don't know, Christina, how quickly you can get stuff up, and if I send it to you now, if that's something we could get up on the website now.
Yep, I can do that.
Okay, sorry that I've been on vacation and very scattered, but I will get that to you now just to make sure. And then did we have somebody who wanted to present on that? Was that Brian? I don't see him on yet.
I thought Brian Pine was going to present, but I have not heard from him or seen him come on.
Did we get that submission for, was it Brian who sent the submission? I can't remember just who sent it to us.
It was Brian who sent it.
Mm-hmm.
Too many emails here.
Yeah, I'm gonna email Brian real quick and just ask.
He sent it on 6/24.
So I've emailed Brian.
Here.
And I'm forwarding it to you again, Christine, just so that you have it to put on the thing. And I think there's two options, which is we could skip it and wait for Brian, but it's also a pretty short report. That's pretty clear. So I wonder if folks would be open to talking about it without getting a presentation from Brian. Sarah, Joe, thoughts?
I don't see other aging council here, but Kirby's here, so maybe she could do the presentation.
Do you feel okay about that, Kirby? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Sure, I wasn't part of the council, but I was involved with giving information and I know a little bit about it, so I can start, and then if Brian comes, glad to turn it over to him. I think what this is an incentive program and it's a pilot. And the goal was to think about ways to try to encourage more people to share their homes. In home sharing, we've been around for 40 years and we have lots of people who are looking for homes, but we don't have as many people willing to share their homes. And actually, as we started to look at the numbers in Burlington, we saw that the numbers were going down. We call them hosts and guests. So people thinking about being a host, either applying or actually matching. So let me back up and just tell you a little bit about what home sharing is. Home sharing is a program. We provide a screening and matching service for people who have an extra room in their home, who are looking for basically a roommate. But a lot of what we do is we help people stay in their homes. So a lot of our matches include a component of what we call service or help around the house. So in exchange for below market rent, people offer some help in order to help somebody stay in their home. So it really helps two people at once. So our average rents last year in our program were $323 a month. And that's because the majority of those people who shared a home helped with a variety of things, whether it's cooking a meal, walking the dog, helping with grocery shopping. Every match is different, and the work of the organization is one of screening and matching. And trying to find compatibility and common interests and things that people might make it more appealing to actually share their home. And often it's older people or people with disabilities who share their home, but it doesn't have to be. So we're seeing a lot more people coming to us in need of just some financial assistance. They might be coming out of a divorce, so they're down to a one-income household instead of a two-income household, and they're trying to make their mortgage payments, whatever it is. So it's a great model because it's really flexible. Every situation is different. And we're just trying to encourage more people to share their homes. And I think a lot of people have become more fearful in the last decade or two around things like sharing their homes. So we're trying to really promote home sharing as a way to stay at home, as a way to help someone else, provide affordable housing. And so one idea we had, or the committee had, was looking at some sort of incentive for people to share their home. And they came up with parameters around what would that look like. So it would be for new people to share their home, not people who are already doing it, but new people. And it would be for people who offered a rent that we would consider affordable. So our rents in our program are a maximum of $650 a month. So if somebody wanted to charge $1,500, that wouldn't work. And in order to get an incentive, a financial incentive, people would need that match to last at least 12 months. So they couldn't get a match, get the money, and then end the match the next day, kind of thing. And the incentive that the committee came up with was $1,000. And there is some discussion here of, could it be a tax incentive, some sort of property tax incentive? There's not a lot of detail on what would that look like, how would it work? I think certainly from a marketing perspective, saying, would you like $1,000 off your property tax bill would get people's attention. But the practical side of how to do that might be more complicated than it's worth. But we could use that certainly as a marketing point, and then they can use the money whatever way they would want. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
That's great. And I don't, obviously, Brian's not here. And I'm not sure how we've done this in the past. Sarah and I joined at the same time, but I don't know if it makes the most sense. So I guess one, I think discussions are any of the parameters that were talked about. So whether it's like how we do it, the 12 months, the amount or anything like that, that anyone has feedback on. So I want to open the floor for Joe and Sarah, but also, I guess once we have an understanding of that, I'll move us towards next steps and what that looks like. So I'll open the floor for questions and comments from the other counselors. Go ahead, Sarah.
I'm just curious, and Kirby might not know this, whether there were discussions about sources of funds to do this. Do you know?
I think they were looking at the Housing Trust Fund.
Okay.
And there was some talk that's going to be bigger than it has been in the past.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that, just because that makes a difference in terms of flexibility, I think that's a fairly flexible source of revenue, if I'm not mistaken. So, and the proposal as it is, isn't at the minute prescribing how the money would be doled out, whether it would be a check or, because there's some ramifications for the home sharer in a sense of whether or not it would be counted as income or not. And I don't know if you had any of those discussions. You're muted, Kirby.
Sorry, I'm not aware of those discussions. They might have had those.
And I don't know, I don't have an opinion on at the moment what would be the better way to do it. I don't know what legally we can ask to take, you know, if, for instance, if it was a property tax reduction, what that would mean. And yeah, I just don't know the complications of, can we do that or can we not do that? And I'm sort of thinking out loud here, maybe for this committee would be based on some presumption that we're supportive, is to put together a couple questions. I don't have the proposal right in front of me now. Is it asking us to make a recommendation? What's it asking us to do? Is it to prove it?
Yeah, so I think I'd mostly be curious as to, like, yeah, hearing from you and Joe how you feel about it, if there's anything of particular in terms of the details that we have additional questions about or that we would want to change. And then I'm happy to follow up with CEO Shad and Brian to figure out what the actual mechanism is around this, and then create a resolution that CDNR could sponsor. So I guess that would make the most sense to me in terms of next steps, to not have a fully warned everything, is to get the information that we need to get, that if we wanted to move this forward, we have we could have a resolution next time that we approve and move to the council. Go ahead, Joe.
Thanks for the presentation, Kirby. I'm curious about the guests and, how many, like, through the application process, is there like a, this is a choice of where, like, the municipality that they want to be in, like, I saw that there are currently 7 Burlington hosts. Do we have a sense of how many guests are on your waiting list, or is there a waiting list that you're keeping?
Yes, so it's not like a traditional housing program with a waiting list. So it's very fluid, people's lives. And it's really trying to figure out the most compatible person. So it's not just taking the next person on the list. And, people where they want to live, a lot of people want to live in the greater Burlington area who come to us, whether they're from here or not from here. So it's really the most popular area. And considering just the population size, we have a pretty small number of people opening up their homes. So, but it wouldn't necessarily be a Burlington person moving into a Burlington home. The homeowner, the 2 people themselves would decide, so people tell us what they're looking for, and we get people to try to think a little bit outside the box, because what exactly they're looking for, we probably aren't going to have.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about that compatibility and fit.
I'm curious, would this sort of be the first of its kind in the state?
In Vermont, it would. There's other programs around the country that are in the same situation, with just having an extreme number of people looking for housing and not a lot of people sharing their homes. So a number of programs across the country in California and Washington State and Colorado are looking at financial incentives to encourage people to open up their homes. And some places are looking even at trying to get Section 8 certificates and other things like that involved to encourage more people to share their homes.
Okay. Thank you. I'm certainly, I think this has some promise. I think it's definitely something worth looking at for us. So I'd be supportive of finding a way to make it happen.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think with a upper limit of $30,000 in terms of city expenses and the potential it has to change, kind of, double that in terms of a household's life. I think that's interesting. Yeah, and I think one of the questions that I had was on the 12 months. I don't know if you're part of the discussion on how that was decided on, but I guess I'm just want to make sure that we're not creating situations where people are like, oh, this wasn't a good match, but I'm going to stick it out anyway to try to get the $1,000.
Yeah.
So just wondering if that's the right amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, our average match length is 18 months. And we sort of look at 9 to 12 months as sort of a success. But yeah, I don't think people stay in something if it's not really working for them for this small amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of money, but, I don't think and we stay in touch, with folks throughout the process, as long as they're matched, we're talking to them, how's it going? And really try to dig a little bit, make sure things are going okay.
Right. Okay. I also see Sarah's hand, so maybe we'll go to Sarah Carpenter and then Sarah Russell.
These are just 2 sort of unrelated thoughts. At some point, it might be interesting for the committee to get a better analysis of homeownership in Burlington. We're losing homeownership units. They're being converted to a number of things, often actually rental, just a straight out rental. That's sort of a side issue. I actually like this program because it might, support homeownership.
Mhm.
But I was just going to offer two, and I don't feel strongly about this, whether the $1,000 could be divided, like in 6 months increments or something like that. I mean, the goal of it, it's not a huge amount of money, is to have somebody sort of try out home sharing and see if it works. And if it works, that's good, So I'm perfectly fine with a little flexibility.
Mhm.
So Sarah, are you thinking like $500 at 6 months and then another 500 if it's a year, or just 500 or just
Yeah.
6 months or?
Because a year might be a long time.
Yep, it feels like a long time sometimes.
Yeah.
During COVID, it feels like a long time.
I mean, and one value of home sharing to me, and there's many values, but it often gives somebody a place to be for 6 months until they sort of figure out what's next.
Mhm.
They're waiting for an apartment or a change in a job or something, so they may not want to do it for a year. And then from the homeowner side, I mean, I look at my own mother who did it, but she only did it for about 6 months, and then her health changed. So there's sort of two kinds of circumstances.
Yeah, I agree with Sarah. I think that's a good idea.
Mhm.
Sarah Russell.
Hi, thanks. Kirby, I was wondering, you mentioned Section 8, and I don't know if I missed what you said about that, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and, we're not working with Section 8 ourselves, but some places across the country, other home sharing programs are trying to use Section 8 in a shared housing situation. But we haven't gone down that path. I think that's very cumbersome for a lot of potential hosts to meet those guidelines, yeah, so we haven't done it, but other programs are in Texas and California in particular. They're using Section 8 successfully in home sharing situations.
Yeah, I mean, I do know that the Section 8 program can support home share situations. People can use their Section 8 vouchers for a room in someone's home. The guidelines are really around the HQS standard, or the inspections, the housing quality standards so the home would need to be inspected. But I think that there could potentially be a great partnership with Burlington Housing Authority locally, because they have about 250 or so unused non-elderly disabled vouchers that they really need to get leased up. The barrier around folks who are homeless is that they can't find a unit to lease those vouchers up. But in thinking about home share situations, it might be actually a really beautiful partnership between home share and the Burlington Housing Authority for rental assistance. So just wanted to put that out there.
I think that's a great idea, Sarah. I'm gonna speak a little on Kirby's behalf, which is, my guess is the administrative work that would have to happen to, help that happen is probably a little beyond home share's current capacity. But, we kind of, in addition to this, it might be a worthy conversation between you and Brian and BHA around, what would it take? And what I imagine it would take would be somebody on the staff side of Home Share Vermont to be more tuned up in that whole process and be able to guide the homeowner. And so it might be a worthy investment to think about. So I would encourage Kirby and CEDO to have that conversation. As I said, I'm just guessing that the current capacity of Home Share probably isn't quite up to that at the minute.
The
But you're always
BHA,
game, right?
BHA did just recently hire, I believe, a leasing coordinator to work specifically with landlords and to recruit new landlords. So I think that that's a function that they are actively working on. So it may, I agree, Sarah. I mean, there is a burden on landlords around, you know, accepting HUD rental assistance for sure, but they may be working to alleviate some of that burden. And I think it could potentially be a great partnership. So,
Well, I think it's well worth pursuing. I mean, I think the thing, and this is really back to the incentive program, is most home share hosts don't perceive themselves as a landlord.
Right.
So that's not in their thought process. And I think the goal of this incentive is to say, you know, it's not as ominous as you think it is. You know, let's try it out. And here's a little money to maybe make it better for you. So it, you know, I think if we could get more home sharers, maybe through that process, you could convince people, well, you know, the Section 8 lease isn't so bad either, but
Yeah.
And
No, it
just
would,
to summarize,
It's
Sorry.
it's really a month-to-month situation usually too.
Yeah.
It's kind of a transitional type of thing, and people need to be able to give a 30-day notice. And if it's not working, you know, there's nothing worse than living with someone when it doesn't work. So
the minimum for rental assistance, I think that they would, I mean, in a special partnership or agreement, the minimum I think that their admin plan allows for is a 6-month lease. So that may pose a barrier for you.
nice. But I think at a minimum, I don't know. I think, Sarah, what I'm hearing you say is if BHA just hired this coordinator, at least flagging with them that that's an option to look into would be worth pursuing.
well, and it does, I mean, the flip of it is if there's a way the BHA has more capacity and home share as well, it actually is a way the homeowner can get a higher rent. So there is some value. The guest has lower rent and the homeowner has higher rent. So somehow packaging and peddling that is, I think, something worth pursuing in addition to this. And the increased rent covers some of the burden.
In addition to a utility allowance as well in most cases.
Great. So I'm hearing so I guess first want to also confirm if Joe and Sarah are okay with this possible next steps. Me talking to CEO Shad and Brian Pine about how to do this. The questions that I have is funding for this, with us likely looking at the housing fund, the mechanism for providing the fund, if it's a property tax, I put income tax, property tax relief, or something else, and what that means in terms of it being income. And then when folks get the money, with our suggestion being $500 at 6 months and $500 at 12 months. Anything else? I give folks another chance to skim over the proposal that we want to ask about or need to clarify or want to change.
I'm good.
Yeah, this was pretty well thought out coming to us, so appreciate. Not that anybody is on the call, but appreciate all the work that went into this. So I'll give our regards to Molly, Charlie, Brian, and Kelly.
Okay,
Great. So that was a quick item. And I'll follow up with next steps once I have them. And without objection, I'd move us to our next item, which is the camping ordinance review and discussion. I didn't get to it in time. I was like, oh, it's already past the deadline, but I almost wrote Christine and was like, oh, can we change it to something that would get folks less thinking that we're moving forward on this discussion, but it looks like we don't have a whole lot of participants, which makes me a little sad because I wonder if that means folks are giving up on the public process and talking to us through it, because we've definitely been a little bit slow. So my proposal would be is that Joe, I don't know if you can give us an update on, I don't know if you have an update on where the administration is, because there is a memo and I think there's some question of how useful it would be or not. But maybe Joe, you can give us an update and then maybe we can decide what our goal is for this discussion, because I think that's a little bit up in the air. And then we can give Lacey and Sarah, whoever else wanted it, the floor. Sarah, I see your hand.
well, just a couple of things, because I had gotten contacted by a couple of people, and I was under the impression that this meeting would be to get updates, certainly from Joe, but from Lacey and Sarah primarily on kind of where they're at. And then I think the committee need to have the discussion on how do we take it from there in terms of the proposal itself. So I was sort of under the impression we'd be focused more on the updates this meeting and then the proposal at hopefully our next meeting.
Yes, and I think that's fine. Yeah, I think being clear around like what updates are helpful for us in terms of what decisions we want to make would be helpful, so we don't take too much of Lacey Ann's and Sarah's time. But yes.
Yeah. I can talk briefly to some of the conversations I've had and my hopes for the updates that we could get right now. So it sounds like a partial review was able to be done by Dan before he left the city in May. And so because it's not quite finished yet, there's some question as to whether or not it would really be super helpful. And so I'm going to keep talking with the administration to see if there's a way that we can view the preliminary report and, continue working on this before we have a permanent city attorney in place, because I think this is an important conversation for us to keep having. And, I think we're sort of all at a point where waiting for this review is significantly delaying that process. So I think it's good for us to find an alternative path forward here so we can keep having conversations about what's working right now and what's not, and where we need to go from here. So I think today would be helpful to sort of hear where the city's at with the number of unsheltered folks that are currently camping, especially given the state changes that happened on July 1st. And if we've seen a big influx since then. And then, I know we've got a pretty sizable working group in the city right now dealing with issues around encampments. So just to hear how that's working, and if there are things in there that aren't necessarily written policy, but would be helpful to have on the books. That's all I have for right now.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, just to sort of add from the conversations I've had in no particular order, it was my understanding that the work that Dan Richardson did was focused more, very big picture, some research on what other communities had done, and really didn't get down into the weeds of what is being proposed or our policy. So that's what I understood. The impression I got from talking to the administration is their focus has been on a number of initiatives that Sarah and Lacey have been working on for the last 2 or 3 months. And I expressed my somewhat frustration that this committee really hadn't been updated. I mean, for instance, this whole conversation on the working committee, you know, I think it's important for us to understand what that's all about. What have folks been working on? And then, as Joe said, you know, what is the sort of status of the situation? Right, as best we know now. I think it, and I had thought others might be here, but there's sort of the impression or discussion that the focus has been on doing stuff, varied programs through Lacey's work and Sarah's work, and that's what we needed to do more from the administration's point of view, more than change the policy. But I appreciate that the proposal is before us and we need to dig into it. So that was sort of leading to the discussion I had by email that we initiate a work session and talk about kind of what's in there, what exists now and what is proposed. So that was sort of where I was coming from. I also just want to comment, and I no one has raised their hand. I think there are a couple people who've been following this issue, you know, residents, and I don't know if they want to speak up at some point. I mean, hopefully maybe towards the end after we hear what's, we get our updates.
Great. Thanks both. And just to add to that, I'm also, I'm a little frustrated that we don't have the memo yet, because regardless of how incomplete it was, I think it would be helpful that whoever has done work on this, that we get that information in front of us, especially because it was requested by the council to be brought to CNR. So I don't think it's okay that we don't have it yet. I will say, to be completely transparent. And that said, I'm grateful to Lacey and Sarah for coming. And I think I haven't been as in touch with you as Joe has, so I think it'll be helpful to hear what the current situation is and what is working well and what's not working well, I guess is how I would frame that. And then I think for the next meeting, I think either Joe or I can do the work, potentially just to make sure that this keeps moving along, of actually putting the language next to each other into some kind of table format and deciding like what we want to tackle. And Joe, I'm happy to have you do that because you'd led it, or as the committee chair, I'm happy to do that. So framing the discussion a little bit with like where we're hoping to get to, if that's helpful to you, Lacey and Sarah.
Sarah, you want to start us off?
I can certainly start us off. So I will start off by saying that following the last meeting, it was news to me that the city attorney had reviewed the encampment policy and returned that review to the mayor's office. So I went to the mayor's office the next day and asked for them to send that along to you. So I'm trying to move that along. I'm not sure why it wasn't shared directly with you from the get-go. So I wanted to just provide that update on outreach. with regard to responding to current encampments, we have pulled together a committee that has met a couple of times, and we decided to initiate a work group, a smaller work group, to develop more specific guidance to staff around camp removal and response to camps in Burlington under the current ordinance. We have our first meeting actually tomorrow morning, and in that, since the time that we met about a week and a half ago, I've been working to identify best practices, which I did share one with Lacey in particular, so to present to that work group to help us to sort of identify some best practices around a compassionate and supportive removal response when necessary. So that's the work that we're focusing on around encampments. I mean, I will say that I really am invested in developing some guidance for staff. I think that what we've heard at our committee meetings is that, I mean, obviously each case is independent and needs to be looked at really independently, sort of what's happening in the scope of need that the particular individual or individuals have and how best to support them. If we're considering an ordinance change, there's a piece of me that feels hesitant to implement guidance around removal if the ordinance will be changing. So I think that we can move forward with that because I do feel like supportive removal and compassionate removal will still be part of the new ordinance from my review. So I think that will be helpful. I think that we're anxiously awaiting sort of next steps and any progress toward that, revision or edit to the current ordinance, I think, moving forward around that. I don't know if Lacey has more current data. CEDO pulls together all of the outreach providers from different agencies once a month or once every 3 weeks or so. And last month, or I guess it was actually only like a week or so, 2 weeks ago, we pulled together that group and did a mapping exercise where we identified where camps were around the city. Actually, we spread to throughout Chittenden County because most of our services serve folks beyond the city limits as well, and identified approximately 45 to 50 people who were camping within the city. And I think there was between 65 and 70 total within Chittenden County that we had identified. Lacey, I don't know if you have updated data on that.
I think that number, the 45 to 55 is pretty consistent in terms of just, there isn't any flow in the system. So without any flow in the system, everybody just kind of stagnant in whatever place that they are in that moment. And I think it's important for folks to know that with Sarah showed me the best practices that are being put out for responding for folks that are sheltering on public land, and the best practice that is what we do, all of those things outside of really there's like an exercise around inventorying encampments, and just from my experience, I've always been a little hesitant for the city to sit in inventory where every campsite is. That is very easy for people to misunderstand what the intentions of that is. And so I just worry about that just from the public's perception, if a document were to be. So I think as long as we're just being mindful around how we do it and how we're articulating how we're doing it, then I'm okay. But I think it was nice for me to know that like what we do, especially within parks, falls in line with what the national best standards are. I don't want to say there's been too much change in terms of when the system changed in July 1. I've heard of a few cases, specifically cases with children, where people have already hit their 84 days because the 84 days starts at the start of the year. It does not start at the beginning of the program, again, July 1. They go all the way back to January. So there are people that have already hit that 84 days. It didn't result in a huge, from what I could see and what folks are telling me that are out there doing outreach, there hasn't been a massive change in terms of the folks that we're seeing outside. But as people start to accumulate those 84 days, if there is nowhere for them in the system, then they're going to lose that motel room. So I think that that's just going to be more of a trickle in terms of the people that kind of fall back out of the system as they hit that 84-day cap. So right now, I wouldn't say there's been a huge exodus, but I think that just as time goes on, we're gonna see just more people kind of fall out of the system, because not only is there no capacity in Chittenden County, but other counties are getting frustrated, not other county, yeah, other counties within the state are getting frustrated with kind of the overflow of Burlington ending up down in like St. Johnsbury and then Rutland, and then the impact of those people that are having on that community, that they're actually talking about taking action about not having people from out of county be allowed in their hotels. And so that if that were to go through, then we would have an even kind of bigger issue in terms of our out of county folks potentially losing housing. We have about 70 people out of county currently. All in occupancy agreements from my understanding. So I think we all look forward to the fall and new units being available, and the housing partners really, we will probably, because what we always end up, we saw this in 2020 or in 2021, will there be this max exodus of people that are in the shelters, moving into permanent housing, hopefully with support so they stay housed. And then we'll see, then we'll see a little bit more of a flow and vacancy within the system and being able to get people inside. Hopefully before winter really hits, because that's going to be, I don't know what we're going to do come the winter, because there is literally no motel capacity in Chittenden County, and they do not have any. And from my understanding, there's even been, I think there's 1 or 2 motels that don't participate at all. And so we're actually losing rooms and not necessarily gaining rooms, even though the state has been clear that they try to bring rooms online more and more on a regular basis on this stuff.
Yeah, I think we've run into a few things. So there are 78 households, as Lacey said, who are from Chittenden County, who are placed out of county because we don't have capacity for them within Chittenden County. There are at least 2 motels who have opted out of the Economic Services Transitional Housing program. I've also recently become aware that Colchester has they don't want to call it cap, so don't put that word in the notes, but in the minutes, but they've put some kind of a I don't know what word
Limit. They've limited.
Okay, on the number of transitional housing program households who can be within the city limits. So that has caused a little bit of challenge. They cite the stress on city resources in terms of emergency response as justification for that. And I think that as Lacey said, we move closer to the 84 days, and we move for a lot of folks, and we move closer to winter. I think that combination is really troubling for a lot of us in terms of people being ineligible for an already what I perceive to be negative. We're in the negative on motel rooms in Chittenden County, and to go into cold weather without any capacity, with less than 0 capacity, feels super concerning. I think that a lot of the discussion that's happened within the encampment meetings, and Lacey can certainly speak more to this than I can, is that when Parks removes camps, people are popping up in other places. And so we're really just displacing people, which I think is a super important point, that we're just displacing people to other locations only to remove their camps again, which I think from a human services perspective causes tremendous trauma. So I, feel like I want to say that clearly. But, also really stresses staff on sort of, identifying, noticing, removing, and doing that sort of process, kind of over and over again. So I think that's important to know. I don't know that there's a solution to that necessarily, but I think that's important to know as well.
Great.
and I'll
Sorry, Lacey,
go ahead.
before you go,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
a minute,
yeah.
I want to give a chance because I feel like you've said, don't want to stop you, but just to ask,
No,
give a chance for a few clarifying questions more than content questions. And I'll just start with two, which one is, I wasn't sure what you said, Lacey. You had a concern around information being available around the inventory, and I couldn't understand if you meant because of the perception of the people who are being inventoried, or that just being public knowledge if we were to provide the inventory to the general public.
I think
So,
it's both. I think it's just like as a whole, being like, it's really easy for people to assume what intentions are, and it's also really easy for them to, on both ends, both on the campers end and on the public's end. And so and that could be even with explanation as to what the intentions are. There's always kind of just this underlying we don't necessarily trust people in positions of power, and that's just a general thing. So I think it's both from both sides, because if it gets around that campers are hearing that the city is tracking where people are, they're going to be like, well, that's because they're coming after us. And then if it gets from the public end, that's because they're criminalizing homelessness. So I just worry about it just as a whole, because we know where they are. Like, I mean, I know, and Neil can speak to it too, as being somebody as the urban park ranger, like he's out there every day. We know where folks are. I worry about actually putting it on paper. And then I also know that like, it is all so fluid. So somebody who is camping in, say the smaller parks, like Callahan and Smalley, people are less likely to be able to camp for any prolonged period of time. Where like Oakledge and Letty and a couple of other places, people have it like, because there's more woods and they have the ability to be kind of a little bit more conspicuous or inconspicuous. People can last a little longer. So there is fluidity to it, because people who are at Smalley and they get told like, you're going to be asked to move, they might go and relocate in Oakledge because they know that there's woods there. So they might be more under the radar. So just because somebody is in one place one day doesn't mean that they're in the same place the next day. And so it almost feels like a little bit of a futile exercise, just because it is so fluid all of the time. And we would have to go ahead.
I was going to say, I think one of the outcomes from our outreach meeting 2 weeks ago, I guess, was that CVOEO would consider creating a shareable Google document so that they hold the document and people can edit the document live. So when somebody moves somewhere else, it's a shared document that all of the outreach folks can see, that's owned by CVOEO and not owned by the city. So I think that was heard loud and clearly from that meeting, from your perspective. And I totally agree with you about the perception of that. And I think that I'm hoping that we found a way to kind of mitigate that a little bit.
And I agree. I think it was more of just like, even for our city, like encampment stuff, just, I'll always be a little worried about that idea.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Two other follow-up questions, and then it looks like Sarah's got some too, is I heard you say that there's no flow, which was a little bit surprising to me. So I guess I was wondering over like what period of time you're talking. So, or if like it's really been stable over like a longer period of time than I think it has. And then I'll just ask the other one as well, which I think is more for Sarah. You had said that there's a limit of households within city limits, and I didn't hear or understand who had that limit.
So Colchester currently is working with ESD. They're very sensitive and very sensitive to not using the word cap. So again, I want to be really clear about that, that is not the word that they would use or how they would describe that. But Colchester has expressed some concern in collaboration with economic services around the strain on emergency response services within the city limits, or town limits, sorry, for Colchester, to expand transitional housing, the transitional housing program within Colchester. So there's been some challenge because there's a few hotels in Colchester that are no longer participating. And I can't get clear information if that is due to limitations of emergency response or really what that is. I think it's a very sensitive issue. In terms of flow, I mean, Lacey, I think you're talking about flow into housing and
Yeah, and to flow within the system. So basically
yeah.
from street to housing. So if you
Yeah.
think that like if someone's camping, in theory, we would try to find some sort of shelter from them. So whether within the shelter capacity within our nonprofits or within the emergency system. And then from there, it's working on permanent supportive housing. But there's no flow because there is no permanent housing. So you're not seeing any flow out of the shelters to move the people in the streets into the shelter. So that's what I mean by flow. The system is very clunky and it's more of like a trickle than an actual flow.
Yeah, I mean, just from a data standpoint, to back that up, in May, we housed approximately 13 households in permanent housing situations. That doesn't include transitional housing or moving in with family and friends or, anything like that, like actual permanent housing placements. We had 13 for May. I don't have the data yet for June, but hope to have it for next week. And in terms of housing development, obviously that takes a bunch of time. And before the end of the calendar year, we anticipate seeing 8 new housing units that will be dedicated to homeless households. So I think that that's a challenge, when we're talking about such a colossal number of households who are experiencing homelessness, and we have 8 new units within Burlington. Certainly there are more outside of Burlington within Chittenden County, but within the city limits, our anticipated new homeless dedicated units is 8.
Got it. Sarah?
Just a couple things. Just sort of back on the inventory, and I appreciate the sensitivity, and I think it does make sense for perhaps CDLEO to hold the information, but I think we do need more public data. And it's hard to. You just told us there were 78 people, in the system, and what is the status of that 78 people? What of the 78 people, I'm just making up that number, what are the impediments? I mean, I feel like it's really hard to have this discussion without understanding kind of why are they not moving? And it's the obvious, there's no housing, but I think we just need to have more conversation. And it's frustrating me, particularly as we get into the fall, into the winter with the legislative session. I don't think we, the city of Burlington, this is a little editorial, are speaking well enough on our own behalf about the impact this situation is having on the city of Burlington. And I think the only way we're going to fight that fight is with better, good data. I mean, it frustrates me to hear that Colchester is capping.
Don't say that word.
Like,
Limiting.
and I'll
And I
say
will-
to my good friends on the Colchester Select Board.
And I'll say, just as an aside, that's been around. Like that
I
started
know that
in
has been.
2020, at least 2021.
No, I'm very
They
familiar with
started this
that.
conversation
The problem
around.
is we don't have any motel rooms.
Yes.
So I hope we're going to have 30 shelter beds with the pod someday soon, which was another thing we like to get updated on. Personally, and people may cringe out there, I think we might want to resurrect camping at North Beach, but you know, we don't have a lot of structured resources.
I mean, I think the thing is, Sarah, when you're talking about data, I mean, according to the outreach folks, the city did fund a full-time outreach person to conduct coordinated entry assessments. And I know that she is doing those on an ongoing basis. I think that anecdotally, it's challenging for her to conduct those assessments. I mean, you're asking really intimate details about people's personal lives and trauma. And to know that there is at minimum a 1-month wait list until that person can be seen by a case manager. I mean, I think that that's a challenge. I think that's a hang up. I think that the other thing, when you're saying like, what is the barrier to moving these folks into housing, is there are significant mental health issues. There are significant substance use issues. There are so many people who are so far from housing. I mean, I think, like I said, about 50% of the folks who are camping outside, according to the outreach team, are engaged in coordinated entry, and they're waiting for a case manager, you know, to work through that process with them. But we're seeing folks with tremendous, I think I want to reframe that. We as a community, and when you talk about the burden on, you know, the city, I would really like to work on reframing that around like the burden on folks who we are not able to serve. So it's not the people who have barriers to moving into housing. It is our system that has barriers to being able to provide appropriate housing options for this population. And I think that until we, you know, reframe that conversation and really critically look at, you know, where our barriers are, that, you know, we're not going to make a ton of headway. So I don't want to, you know, be on a soapbox about that, but I think that I'm not implying that anyone is oversimplifying, but it's really not as easy as meeting someone and putting their name on a list and then they move into the next apartment that's available. And I don't mean to say that that's where you're coming from at all. Yeah.
But it's more of, you know, what do we need? And we could argue the whole system needs to be changed, and I'm not going to disagree with that at all. I'm just saying more immediately, what do we need? You know, for example, it's not apples and oranges, but you know, the whole funding of the COATS model is stalled because we need money from the state to match that, you know. And I'm just venting a little bit about trying to get that kind of word out more, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that I think, especially around, I think this is a good segue to check in about the Elmwood shelter community as well. I don't want to completely leave encampments if we're, you know, not done discussing, but we have had some, I think, really productive conversations with the Agency of Human Services. Secretary Samuelson joined 2 meetings over the last 2 weeks to talk about the Elmwood project, and we can certainly give updates. I see other folks have their hands up, so I don't want to over talk, but let me know when you're ready for that update.
Joe and then Neil.
Thanks. I just wanted to, before we move off of encampments, I had a couple of questions about, you know, folks bumping up against the 84 days. So is that something that would have, I guess my question is, are there essentially 2 channels that folks ended up in after the requirements shifted on July 1st, so that they were continuing to be housed for 84 days if they had time left on that clock? And then there are the people who have the occupancy agreements who, as long as they have VRAP access, can stay in that arrangement.
That's correct. There's also a provisional 28 days that if folks who were trying to or expressed an interest to move into the transitional housing program and hadn't yet firmed up, but they were in the process of firming up those occupancy agreements, there was a provisional 28 days that could be allowed as well. But other than that, you're correct in that.
Okay. So Lacey, I think what you were speaking to is we're essentially looking at like a rolling.
Rolling 84 days. So
Yeah.
like, yeah,
So not a deluge of people being exited from the program, but over time, we'll see more and more. Got it. Okay. Thank you. I think that was just the only clarifying question that I had.
Hey, my name's Neil Preston. I'm the Parks Urban Ranger, and really still I'm new to this and still trying to get my arms around it because it's huge. And one of the things that I'm seeing and wondering about is like, do we have a difference in our perspective between like the single tent that's there in Battery Park for 1 or 2 days versus somebody who's kind of entrenched in Oak Ledge for 2 months? And how do we think about and deal with that? This may not be the place, and it's okay for somebody to say, Neil, take this offline. It's totally okay.
No, I think this is the place. Go
But
ahead.
this is really important to me for where I stand and how I choose to manage individuals and support them with an eye towards their dignity and compassion, right? And a lot of times I'm just thinking about harm reduction, how to get them in like further from the playground, out of the impact of the rest of the community in a space that is still safe for the individual and they can get their needs met within that space. And so I just think of very different places where there's a tent in Battery Park. There's 2 tents in Battery Park when I came into town this morning. And for the most part, I've engaged with those people and they're connected to the system. They're not, they're you know, respectfully, it's just something that the public doesn't want to see as far as that tent in the space. And so I feel like the people, the actual individuals are safer if they're tracked and we know where they are within the system as from a parks perspective and from my job. But then also that I'm supposed to approach them differently if the site in Batteries is immaculate and perfect, which is very different than a site someplace else that is degrading for the individual who's living in that space, but also for the property, also for the rest of the community working on it. And where I come to my question is in changing of the camping ordinance. Like I have a document that is a adjustment of the camping ordinance that is about to put us into a space where people are noticed for 30 days with 14 days to appeal. And I'm just curious about that because it seems like if folks leave the shelter with a tent when they leave the shelter, it just seems like our hands as a city are going to be tied in the movement and management if it's a 30-day notice and then 14 days to appeal. And I'm concerned for people being able to stay in their own space and have it be worse and have their health degrade, you know, let alone what the rest of the community then has to go in and manage.
That's Sarah.
Well, I think you're right on point, Neil, which is why I have asked, and I think we need to start picking. There's quite a bit of spread in between what's proposed and what is, and there's 2 sets of philosophies, I believe. One is allowing more flexibility to meet the goals. One is developing more procedures which could provide more protections. And we really haven't had that discussion. And I guess that's what I'm asking that we do. And I also want to keep very much on the table. There's a difference between changing an ordinance and changing a policy and changing a procedure. And so right now we have a very minimalist ordinance and then we have a policy. That's what you're working on. From my perspective, the proposed ordinance change and the proposed policies have much more detail. And that's what we've got to analyze and see where we get. I'm going to hazard a guess that how much of all that gets adopted is we're still very far apart on. So I don't want us to be presumptive that things are just going to pass through as proposed. Certainly not from my perspective, not to a handful of councilors I have talked to, not probably to the mayor. I mean, to change it wholesale, it's going to take a whole convincing process, and I don't think we're close to that in my opinion. So I think we've got to absolutely start talking about the things you're talking about, and there is a difference between, you know, 1 or 2 nights and an encampment, but I can see at least one constituent following Smalley Park, you know, having a tent that says don't approach it because there's needles involved is not something you can have on a child's playground. That's a different and firmer approach than the woods that we have about town. And we've got to have that conversation. Our current policy isn't quite as clear as it probably ought to be on when are you really firm about, no, you can't stay here for more than 24 hours, period, because the kids from the, you know, Boys and Girls Club will be here tomorrow. I mean, that's a different answer than if you're kind of off in another place. And I think that's what we've got to get better at, and to satisfy everybody's, as you point out, safety.
One of the things that's in my purview that I notice is the folks that I'm engaging with when they're camping within the park system is, you know, they are so stressed that there very frequently is no thought to where should I put this, right? Like, and that's a function of being unhoused and all of the baggage that comes with this. And so how could we systematically communicate better to the folks that are leaving the shelter with a brand new Ozark Mountain tent in hand? How can we better communicate to them of like, here's where you can and can't, here's what would be better best. As just a like, here, let's reduce the harm, and they're coming out of a difficult space with no understanding of where they should, could, or can't go. And so that's a piece that I feel like would be helpful within the space that isn't ordinance related, that is just harm reduction for education.
Joe and then Sarah. Oh, maybe I can't. I feel like both Sarah and Lacey, I've seen them open their mouth a few times. So maybe Joe, then Lacey, then Sarah.
Yeah, and I know we want to get to an update on Elmwood and stuff like that, so I won't go on too long. I just, you know, I think what Neil said is right on, and I think, you know, the concern that I've had from the start of this is, you know, we have so many people in the city doing good work and trying to make our response to this more humane, more compassionate, emphasizing harm reduction. And I am very deeply grateful for that work. My concern is that, you know, if ever y'all leave the city and there's an administrative changeover, that the work you've done unravels under different leadership. And so I worry about the impermanence of, you know, an administrative policy that might be working right now. I don't think anything's ever going to be perfect in the way we respond to folks that are camping or sheltering outside, because it's so fluid. You know, I think there are things that we can codify, and I think that's why an ordinance to me feels important. You know, to what level of granularity we get to with that, I think is certainly open for conversation, but you know, to ensure that something is here long after we've all gone on to other things, I think is important. So just to sort of frame the hope of an ordinance over an expanded policy from my perspective.
I think all I was gonna say, Neil, is, and we can go into this more, when is it, Thursday, whenever I'm seeing you. I think there's nuance to this in terms of like an encampment is not to some people, an encampment is a tent. And to other people use the word encampment to call anybody camping in a tent an encampment. That is not, in reality, that's really not how it plays out, because an encampment is really has to do with the degree of entrenchment versus somebody camping in a park with just a single tent. And I have always tried to let people know that, you know, it's a delicate thing trying to tell people where to go, because then that can be perceived as permission, which we don't have any sort of authority to do right now. You do a little bit different than I do because you're a parks employee. I don't. So, but I will let people know that like popping up a tent at night and sleeping overnight in a tent is not the same. And then collapsing it in the morning, not even necessarily collapsing it in the morning and taking it down is not camping. That's not an encampment to me. That's somebody popping up a tent. That's a single tent. So it's the prolonged part. It's like the leaving of the tent that gets everybody up in arms. So I try to go into detail with people if it is just like the battery folks that just like put up a tent, because there's certain types of kind of camps that are different, that happens more frequently in certain parks versus other parts of parks where you can see where people like are in like their encampments. They have been there and they've been there for some time. And so, yeah, I think it's all in the conversation. It's all in how we communicate with people. And I always talk to people about like, these are the things that usually result in people being asked to move, whether it be cleanliness or large groups of, like you grow in terms of not just you as a camper, but like you end up having 5 people camping with you. And just, I try to make sure that they know what it is that usually results in people being asked to move. And as long as they're willing, and the more information that I have, the more that I am able to go back to the folks that make the decisions so they know what's happening and what your timeline is and where you are and all of those things. So it's all, I think in my mind, just a part of how we have conversations with them about like, hey, you're here. We understand why you're here in terms of like, you clearly don't have anywhere else to go. So how do we work with you? And how can they often don't want to draw attention to themselves either. They're not trying to draw attention to themselves. So how do I help you in trying not to draw attention to yourself? So yeah, I do think that there is a difference in how our approach in terms of how we do the dealing with somebody, an encampment that usually comes with a ton of belongings versus just a single tent and somebody finding a place to sleep or 2, because those are often the couch surfers, in my opinion. Those are the people that can find temporary housing and then they just don't have a night or 2 that they're out because they haven't been able to find a couch. The folks that we have that like live outside, those are the encampments, and those are also usually our chronic. Those are the people that have been homeless for years and years. And there are different approaches in terms of how to work with those folks and best practices, because they are both houseless individuals, but the ways in terms of engaging and where they are and how to do it is a little bit different.
I guess the only thought that I would add to that is that like, as this conversation advances and as we move towards an ordinance or a policy, I would assume that there probably wants to be a management division in between the camper and the encamper, right? And without that defined division, you're gonna be in a position where your kind of hands are bound to manage the camper the same way you would manage the encampment. And that may not be as humane as we would like to be able to be. That's just a thought. You guys have all been here way longer than I am, and I will wait for awesome knowledge to come my way. Thank you.
I think we're also taking into account some significant mental health challenges that Lacey and her team are up against. I know, one particular person who is in a park who probably should move on. And there's a sort of a inability to be able to serve her with a trespass because of some mental capacity concerns. So I think that we are really looking at each situation individually. I also want to note that maybe it's just because I'm coming into Burlington a little bit more these days, but there has been a plethora of people in City Hall Park sleeping during the day. And I think that, those are folks who I don't know where they go at night, but are spending the day sleeping during the day in City Hall Park. And I would suspect that's probably the case with other parks as well. So that's another kind of component to this, as in addition, as you consider it's not a camp. There are no tents in City Hall Park. So
They live, yeah, those are the city. It's also, they all have like microcosm, like they're all kind of like their own microcosm too. So the City Hall Park folks, I mean, a lot of them are housed, but then there's the ones that were clearly unhoused and they just live downtown. Like those are mostly people that like are living just like literally in our downtown versus having their pack and going out and finding a site somewhere in one of the parks. I think there's a portion of them that are doing that too, because those are the ones that kind of like, I mean, I think maybe have the challenges that they do face aren't maybe as significant as some other ones, but they're still significant, but they might not be as deep in terms of just how chronic things have been. But yeah, those are the ones that are literally like, they're sleeping in our parking garages, they're sleeping at Memorial Auditorium, they are sleeping all around, whether it be Church Street or, the alleyways or the doorways. That's really the City Hall. So they don't really go far from the City Hall Park, the folks that are living kind of downtown. Specifically.
Any other thoughts? Or Joe, I thought you had some specific questions still.
No, that was all for me. If there is an update on Elmwood, that would be good to hear.
sure. So we are working on finalizing the management plan to hopefully send to receive the permit. Our permit, as you know, was contingent on having a formalized management plan. So we are in the process. I just finished the last updates about an hour ago and sent them off. So hoping they will be submitted tomorrow. If there is an appeal, my understanding is that will need to be submitted by the 22nd or 21st, I think, of this month. If there is an appeal, they will have 14 days to request a stay. If the stay is granted, we will not be able to begin development of that site. I believe that if the stay is not granted, we will move forward with development because the majority of construction that happens there will either support permanent housing or development of the location at some point in the future. And the structures that are on order are temporary structures meant to be put up and taken down. So there's no unnecessary incurred cost to moving forward. So we are anxiously awaiting for the 21st to come and go, hopefully silently, and move forward with that. We had a couple of fairly productive meetings with the Agency of Human Services and the mayor's office, where we pulled in about 30 or so, I think, agencies and providers, folks to come together to talk about how the community can best support the Elmwood shelter location. And we are working on developing and finalizing MOUs with service providers and actively engaging in discussion with a couple of entities around management of the site, and hope to have some more details on that piece within next week. So we are, in addition to the management contract, I've spent a bunch of time learning about how the Champlain Inn handles behavioral guidelines and infractions to their behavioral guidelines in terms of, asking folks to leave, and kind of what the tiers of, of breach of those guidelines entail, and the response as well, so that we can develop some really well-informed, well-informed practices and policies around managing behaviors at the Elmwood location. We've received well, I don't have the formal letter yet, but received notification that our application for state housing opportunity program funds, or HOP grant, was approved by OEO, which will cover roughly 50% of the staffing operating costs at the location. And we are actively pursuing other funding through different entities at this point to get us whole for the first 12 months. If there are other specific questions around that, I'm happy to answer those as well. I will say that the last community meeting that we hosted with neighbors from Elmwood, who the first meeting that I attended was absolutely painful. People were super negative, the 8 people who showed up, but there was a marked turnaround in tenor of this meeting. The residents, especially of Mackenzie House, who showed up were like completely different people, and I think are saying, okay, we still have concerns, we still have reservations, and we accept this, and how can we be involved? We had really great turnout from the interfaith group and the faith-based community at that meeting. They came and talked, about how they would support the site as well. And I actually think it was, I left with a smile on my face from that meeting. It was a really great discussion. So I think that folks are kind of turning around a little bit in the immediate area to be more supportive. So just wanted to share that too.
Thanks, Sarah. Joe or Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, no, that was useful to know. I suppose we don't know the timeline because it will depend on the appeal. Is there other discussions going on about additional low barrier options?
From the city standpoint?
Yeah, or just in the region, I guess, but.
Not that I've heard of. I know that they are trying to implement some kind of, I don't think I'm really trying to veer away from the word pod. So I'll say individual shelter unit. I don't think it's specific, but there is another community, I think it's Brattleboro, that is looking into something somewhat similar, but in terms of the individual shelter unit, this would be the first in the state. So I think that there's not a whole lot going on around that. I think Chittenden County holds the largest number of, we hold well over a third of the houseless population in the state. So I think that there is less challenge in other areas of the state. And I think really people who need or want or would be more successful in low barrier options tend to arrive in Chittenden County because we have more services as well. So I don't think that they're seeing as much of this challenge in other parts of the state, at least from conversations that I've been a part of.
I tossed out, whether we would consider looking at North Beach like we did during COVID. Is that anything that's been discussed?
I think it's been brought up as something that was super successful. I know Lacey spoke to that at one of our last meetings that we had, that it was brought up as a successful model and a way to connect with people who historically we had not been able to connect with. I can let Lacey speak to that more for sure. So I think that has been something that has at minimum been identified as a positive strategy opposed to a traditional motel setting.
October will be here soon.
It will be, yeah.
The campground closes the beginning of September, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think Labor Day. I think we're hoping to, there's been some construction delays, obviously with the, delays and everything construction related, but I think that our hopeful open date for Elmwood is probably going to be maybe October-ish at this point, just because there's a supply, chain issue. I mean, I think if there's an appeal, like I said, I think we'll still move forward. If there's a that's granted, we would not be able to, and in that case we would have a bunch of shelter units coming with no place to put them. So I think we may be would start. I don't believe that that's going to happen. So I think though that at some point it's a possibility that we may need to look at alternative locations for those units. But certainly that would involve infrastructure. I don't need to go into detail, but there, in terms of like power, and the bathrooms at North Beach are not winterized. There is no, community space that is winterized for people to, be in those units at North Beach. We, could run it. So I mean, I think that there's a lot of considerations if we were to shift gears with an alternative location. So at this point, we're really focused on Elmwood and, putting all of our energy into the universe for that.
Well, I wasn't looking at it necessarily as an alternative as much as perhaps in addition, at least. I mean, there are a fair number. I mean, Michael Monty said he's got in 18 months 150 new homeless units. So that will have a problem with, it's getting somewhat between here and there.
Well, none of those are in Burlington, so I think that's one challenge. So I mean, I think that there's that piece, and then I think that there's also just it's wonderful to have those units, and if we're thinking of about 50% of the people who are unsheltered, who are in coordinated entry, that's I don't know how much movement from that specific population we would see into those specific units, I think, but it is hopeful that go ahead, Lacey.
Yeah, I mean, I will never poo-poo any housing because we need that more than anything right now. But you have to understand, like, even, I mean, there's people outside right now that were evicted from Champlain Housing Trust. So it is not it fits a certain population of folks that are houseless. And those really, again, are the people that have the ability to adapt in different, that have sorry, you know what I'm saying? They just have adaptive skills in a different way than the folks that are definitely living outside. So I think that it frees up, I mean, that will allow for fluidity in the system. And some of the folks that are living outdoors will be able to successfully move into the shelter system and maintain there. But we can't, and I say this all the time, we can't really do what we've already done for the folks that are outside, because the folks that are outside have already shown us that what we have already done doesn't work for them. So if we're really trying to make a dent in this, we have to be doing something that has not already been done. And if we keep recreating what we've already done, then we're never truly going to actually hit any sort of functional zero, because we will always be losing people, because what we have right now, it fits only a portion of what we have. We need to be doing things a little bit different and really be broadening what we offer in terms of services and when that system and what housing looks like, and how we help people to be successful while in housing, to keep them housed, because that's really like all the folks that are outside have been housed before, and probably on more than one occasion outside of the shelter system. It's really about how the systems that work right now don't work for those people. And we have to figure out how we're going to be able to create something that actually works for them and not really against them.
And I totally agree with that. And that's, kind of circling around my question on data. And I know there's, what is it that
I don't know that data's going to get into that nuance though, because it's really complex. It's complex needs.
But it frames the conversation. If it's 50 people and 50 people those 50 have,
I think we do from coordinated entry, right, Sarah? I mean, we're not totally out there
Okay.
without any data. We have data because of our coordinated entry system. These aren't people that like, we don't have any information on them at all. There's some of them that haven't touched the coordinated entry system just in terms of they are known within the shelter system, but whether or not they buy into coordinated entry is a totally different thing. And you know, like even though we have the outreach worker that goes out to the parks that can do the paperwork, I mean, Sarah and I were talking about, it's like a 15-page document. Like it takes over an hour to do it. Like it is not necessarily an easy feat to sit down and do with somebody who they're just trying to survive and don't know, you know, how are they going to get to the food shelf that day? Like, let alone sit down and do 15 pages of papers and explain it all and sign it all. So it's just, I think that the data is helpful, and Sarah can speak to kind of coordinated entry and maybe having someone kind of give you that, you know, macro level view of what it is to be houseless in our community. But I think the complexity of these people and the needs that they have and how the system isn't really set up to meet those needs is not going to be ever found in any set of data.
well, and I'm not, but again, things like, you know, if we had 3 more of you, how would that work? Or 3 more of Sarah, or 3 more straight out, you know, I'm just trying to wrap into, at a macro level, what else should we be advocating for? It's, you know, changing an entire system is probably much beyond what the city council can do, but are there other things we should be advocating for? You know, if we have a 30-bed, 30-spot low barrier shelter in the city of Burlington, is there another place we should be trying to get one of those? And, you know, so that's just maybe how.
And I think that's really a good, I mean, that's in my mind, that's really like emergency shelter is really kind of the growing need in terms of like there should be a place for people to go. Like it shouldn't have to be, I'm resorting to camping. And
Right.
so even with the pods, there's definitely the need in terms of the number of people outside exceeds 30 pods.
Mhm.
I think also, you know, places where people can stay during the day. I mean, I can't imagine having to leave my belongings and everything that I own for the whole day and leaving that somewhere and not being able to access it for the whole day. I can't imagine leaving a shelter in the morning and not knowing if I have a bed that night. I mean, that is a stress that is so far from my awareness and personal life that I can't even honestly wrap my mind around it. So I think that there's certainly a need. I would echo everything that Lacey's saying. There's certainly a need for low barrier shelter. You know, within the city for sure. I mean, we don't have motel capacity. And I know that that's one of the criticisms I think that we have in Burlington. I mean, I had some, some challenges communicating with the state, even being able to access ESD data or economic services data around people who are in hotels, because the response I'm getting is, why do you care? There's nobody in Burlington, you know? So I think that there is a perspective out there that, you know, there is not emergency shelter capacity within Burlington, and that this is spilling, I guess I wouldn't use that word, into other communities. And so I think that, you know, if we were to look at in some way expanding emergency shelter is never an answer to homelessness. I mean, I think we can all agree with that, you know. However, it's a step for some people that if they can be successful in a low barrier emergency shelter, that they could potentially be successful in the next layer of housing. But we have to give folks time. And I think that that's, you know, what we need. And, you know, not to go deep into the, sort of social worky piece of this, but, you know, these are folks who have been traumatized by our systems and have created deep rooted distrust from, you know, failed, foster home placements, and, you know, have trauma from our systems. And we're asking them to trust these systems now at this time in their life where that's beyond their comprehension. And I think that we need to create low barrier options for people so that they can build that trust, you know, to be able to fill out that 15-page document. So I guess I could just go on forever, but I won't.
And I totally agree with you. And I worked a lot on that. And I started my career running 2 rooming houses on Park Street for homeless people.
Yeah.
So, and that was a long time ago. So,
Yeah.
but then we're kind of spinning back around from the
Yeah.
city micro level. You
Yeah.
know, it's a burden on one municipality, and
Mhm.
we can't convert the use of all our public parks to that. You know, they
Correct.
have a function, and so
Yeah.
that's sort of the tension that we have.
Yeah, I mean, I think from an advocacy level, we have been unable as a community to fully utilize our COC grants for permanent supportive housing. That comes to us in the form of rental assistance, and that is low barrier rental assistance. So those folks who have not been successful on previous Section 8, you know, programs, who are ineligible, people who have specific criminal, you know, charges, or folks who are currently using are ineligible for mainstream rental assistance resources. So we do have permanent supportive housing rental assistance. We lack service dollars to match with the rental assistance, and we lack units to be able to house people within those units. So I think that from an advocacy level, we really need flexible, non-categorical case management funding to be able to support people once they're in housing. I see that as a huge challenge. And I think there's a lot of other things that we could advocate for around case management on the spectrum. A lot of times people, you know, one person will do a coordinated entry assessment, and then you meet with another person for intake, and then you meet with another person who does your housing navigation, and then you meet with another person who helps you move into your apartment, and then you meet with another person who's supposed to provide, you know, longer term services to you. And for folks who have this distrust of the system, transitioning from 3 or 4 or 5 different case managers from entry to housing is a barrier in itself. So I think there's a lot that we can advocate for in terms of success for folks in housing.
I think I'd also just piggyback on these, in addition to the, like, there's no place for folks to go during the day, because that is a really big piece of this. There's also the element of storage and people not having any place to put their belongings, whether they're living outside or not. I mean, I think, and that's just because you can't really have more than just like a single bag. And so I know people that will not go into the shelter system because they refuse to give up their possessions because it's all they have. So if they knew that that was going to be stored elsewhere or had the ability, then they'd be fine with just having their one bag at shelter, but they're not going to do that. And so they're not going to give up their stuff. So I think there's a lot of other things that besides shelter that really can help in terms of the engagement and the outreach piece. And like Sarah said, like I got 3 people that work on non-categorical case management, and I consider part of the things that we do as retention work, but we're 3 people, you know, there's 4 of us and everybody else is in their box in terms of that type of work. So I think that, yeah, I know that I said something about emergency shelter, but it really is kind of all of these things that we need in terms of this. When I talk about the creativity that we need to add to the system, it's really around the things that we do know that work when engaging this population and that we just don't have in this community.
It would seem to me that the day shelter, or whatever we want to call it these days, and the storage are something we probably should tackle. I mean, those don't seem insurmountable.
We are actually working at hoping to pull together a group of folks to continue a project that was started and then stalled around installing storage at the library. So that's something that they have a real appetite for and some funding for. So that's hopefully an initiative that will be moving forward.
Go ahead, Lacey.
But I was going to say that's for the library, because the library has its own ecosystem that struggles with this issue in terms of storage and property, and just the amount of property that people have. So That was specifically for like the library trying to address the library issue. If we're trying to broaden it, like it would have to be, there was like 5, bins. So I think that doesn't even touch the need in terms of like what we're seeing in like City Hall Park with people just having
Yeah,
everything that they own. with it.
Certainly, there are other models around providing what is it? The bin, I think is called in Los Angeles, I think,
Yeah.
but there
Yeah.
are certainly other models around providing free storage to
Yeah.
people that we could.
I think I was just thinking about the sheer, there's like the number that we were talking about doing with the library project is just minuscule in terms of need.
So I know we have to move on to the next item here. I have to leave a little bit before 7, but I do want to maybe note for our next meeting if, I think what's clear here is that there is a lot more that we can be doing that maybe isn't necessarily geared to getting more units online, but, turning the sort of, we have this hope of a safety net, but right now we just have a couple of planks that are maybe catching folks and not really a broad sort of net to catch folks. So I think if we can talk about pieces in addition to however we codify these protections going forward, I don't want us to get so bogged down in that conversation that we're not doing these tangible things that we can do, I think, more immediately to improve people's lives. So just want to note that, and thank you all for having this long conversation and kind of getting at some of those more granular details that we've missed over the last couple months.
Thanks, Joe. And
you.
I just want to pass on via Sarah and Lacey to talk to Brian and whoever and come back with a couple of proposals. I mean, for instance, the storage. I don't know what the city owns for property, where, there's an option. Think of an option. Toss it out there. We have an auditorium in a high school, but at the minute, got tons of space. But we've got lots of other land, and I have no idea what we own for buildings. I probably should, but I don't. So anyway, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Lacey. Really appreciate you being here, especially for that amount of time. And yeah, if there's anything concrete that you want us to take to the council at any point, feel free at any point to message any one of us, and happy to try to help make that happen.
Thank you so much to all of you. And, certainly I don't want to speak for Lacey, but I will. We're more than happy. We're in deep in this, and we're more than happy to have additional, side conversations or, whatever might be helpful with any of you around the need and potential solutions. So please reach out to us as well.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks both. So Sarah, Jo, Christine, I maybe was also working on this while we were talking. There was already a statement on the CDNR website that I just edited a little bit. So I don't know if you want to take the last 5 minutes to make suggestions, which I'm happy.
Did you send it to us or?
It's in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Which I assume is okay, because I think that's open to everyone.
I like this.
And it's interesting, but I like this too a lot. We haven't as a committee done a lot of work on more what I would call community development. It's a pretty wide berth of stuff, and we've actually focused more on housing and around that. And I just only call that out because sort of relatively to city council work, there's a lot of issues, you know, so I don't know where to put that in there, but, and I don't know that we're gonna have time to talk about all those things, but
Is there an edit you would like to make, or?
well, we do predominantly talk about quality of life issues, but I don't know where to wedge in community development, even though in fact we haven't focused much on it, and maybe, you know, it's biting off more than we can chew as a committee. And some of it's come up more in the work that our Department on Economic Development is doing. So, and I only sort of toss that out there because, you know, as a city council committee, how do we interject on those issues, I guess, is sort of, and I'm not saying that I have an answer, I'm just tossing that out there.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to your question, but I guess in the spirit of being ambitious, I at least added community development in addition to quality of life.
Okay, that's we'll put that in there, and that gives us a lot to chew on.
Yeah, and I think, you know, and this is maybe outside of the statement, but, you know, to actualize that line in the statement, if there's a way for us through the agenda to be more mindful of, you know, checking in on areas that we are touching on that. And I guess I can save other comments about how we might do that for our next agenda item.
Great.
Okay, good.
Do you folks feel good about this being the mission?
Yeah.
Great. Don't know if we need to take a vote, so I'm erring on the side of caution. I'll just maybe ask for a motion to approve this mission.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilor McGee, seconded by Councilor Carpenter. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. And any opposed? Passes unanimously. Great. Then our last item is next agenda item, which I think is future agenda items. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So to recap, I'll get back to the committee. Presumably, we're going to plan an August meeting, and I'll try to make sure that we've got some kind of resolution by August for us to approve for the city council. Then Joe, if you could let me know if you want to do more of the comparative language piece, or if you want me to do it. And same, one of us can work on, I'm happy to work on getting us the draft, whether that's in as an executive item or public.
I'd be happy to work with Jean on the comparative piece, and Jean had offered to navigate the extensive legalese that is currently the draft. So I think I can work with Jean on that piece, and I'm also happy to follow up with Jordan on how and when we'll get that draft policy or the draft review, excuse me.
Okay. And then just to make sure I did say this publicly, because I think maybe I just had a conversation with Sarah and Joe about it, is non-citizen voting, I'm pretty sure went forward in charter change. And I don't know if any of us made it to that meeting. I think there was an invitation to us to make it to that meeting, and I'm not honestly sure where that process went, but that was something that was in our outstanding items that we haven't.
Well, Well, I'm on it, charter change.
Oh, right, that's what it was, yeah.
I actually, it's cooking along. Unless we have a great desire to take it on or back, I don't know that we need to, there's draft language. The draft language is out there. I can make sure that Jean sends it to you. I think the work that's really got to be done is outreach and public information. In fact, there had been a conversation tonight about going to Trusted Community Voices, which I think got postponed to the 26th. So there's been a couple of meetings. So as a committee, I don't know how we want to weigh in. I'm making some assumption we're supportive of the work. We could formalize that if we want to do that. There was
I feel fine about, and I'll check in with Joe. Clearly, you've had if Jean just wants it to send it to Joe and I, and if either one of us has concerns, we can pull it onto the CDNR agenda. But other than that, I think we can just support it as part of the council process.
One of the things that I think we're going to, at our next council meeting, Jean is preparing I want to call it a resolution. It's more like a memo to inform the council kind of where we're at. And because it's been sort of bouncing around since 2019, it's going to be like a reaffirmation that the council is in fact still all on board about this. And so I think that'll come up for a discussion item, or at least that was the plan as of the last charter meeting, to sort of reaffirm that the whole new council knows we're working on it, and they are to expect, charter change language, which will come in a few months.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually been brought to the council twice, so it's has a long history, and I think that's how it landed on our list as well.
I'm sorry, I have to run, but
Okay. So you'll try to sort of doodle us or do something about another meeting.
Yeah.
And I would suggest 2 hours is long, but we make it long enough that we can walk through the details, so we all try to get more on the same page about what's being proposed and what's not. And I just might suggest that, Joe, in some of your stuff, there's sort of the first tier and the second tier,
Yeah.
So I don't know that we need to cover it all at the same time, but and some of it almost is like in the form of a question. For instance, storage of items, is we don't have to answer that. We just need to say we need to answer that.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So I'll send the four of us a doodle poll for the next meeting. Joe, I know you got to go, so without objection, I'll adjourn the meeting at 7 p.m.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you all.